My name is Bernard Carr, and I'm the president of the Scientific and Medical Network. And I'm delighted to be taking part in a discussion on Saturday, the 29th of November. And this discussion is really a taster for a very important meeting which is going to take place in Rome in December 2026. And so, in some sense, this short video is itself a taster for the taster. I should accept that this meeting is entitled, Is Consciousness the Bridge Between Scientific Discovery and Mystical Illumination? And I'm, I guess, a scientist rather than a mystic, but I'll be giving my perspective both in the meeting on the 29th of November and then later on next year in Rome. So I should explain, first of all, that I'm a cosmologist. And so I studied the history of the universe way back from the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. And of course, that always raises the issue of the relationship between science and religion. Did God create the universe, or can physics explain where the universe came from without God? And my supervisor was Stephen Hawking, and as most people know, he was really an atheist. He was quite convinced you didn't need God at all. He had a sort of antipathy to theology, in fact. I took a different view, although I had tremendous respect for Stephen as a cosmologist. And I don't think it's as simple as that. I do believe that physics is triumphant in explaining the world, but that it doesn't explain everything. And you don't necessarily need God to create the Big Bang, but in my view, there are other reasons for believing that there is, if you like, what you might call God, or that's a very vague term. But based more on actually the experience, mystical experience, than actually scientific discoveries. I suppose a lot of my interest in this subject started with some work I did with Martin Rees in 1979 on the anthropic principle. It's based on the apparent fine-tunings between the physical constants which are required for us to be here, for life to arise in the universe, for there to be observers. Now, I published a paper with Martin in Nature in 1979, and this was actually quite a controversial idea at the time. Nature is a prestigious physics journal, but a lot of physicists thought that the anthropic principle was really philosophy or even theology, because obviously there was always the hint that if the universe is fine-tuned for life, maybe that required God to create the universe. And that idea did not go down well with most physicists. Because the point is there were these fine-tunings and it wasn't clear how physics would explain it. So at the time, that was very controversial. Later on, however, the idea of the multiverse became very popular. The idea there are many universes with different constants. And this really made the idea of the anthropic fine-tunings palatable to many physicists, because you're saying that, well, physics alone can predict the multiverse, where there are different constants, and we're necessarily in one of the universes which allows life to arise. So even atheist physicists like Steven Weinberg liked that, because they thought it did away with God. Now, actually, I've always regarded that as far too simplistic, that if God can create a universe, he can also create a multiverse. So it simply isn't true, in my view, that the existence of the multiverse does away with God. I happen to be interested and believe, in some sense, in both the multiverse and God, although both those beliefs are controversial among my physics colleagues. So that's really how I got into I suppose, the intersect between cosmology and religion. However, later on, I got much more interested in the more general problem of consciousness, and that, of course, is going to be the theme of the discussion on the 29th of November. And because the point about consciousness is that it really does indicate that physics is not complete, because physics currently cannot explain consciousness, and it cannot explain mental and spiritual experience. And of course, one reaction to that is to say, well, therefore, consciousness, mind, and spirituality are either illusions or at least nothing to do with physics. I don't take that view. I've always taken the view that you should expand physics, which has been so successful, to in some sense accommodate consciousness and mind and spirituality. And I personally believe that a future paradigm of physics will accommodate consciousness and mind and spirituality. And I have my own theory as to how that can be done. This isn't a mainstream view among physicists, but it is a view which many eminent physicists share. Now, I won't get into the details of how that will happen. I just think that physics needs a future paradigm, and that future paradigm will amalgamate relativity and quantum theory. And I believe that future paradigm will accommodate consciousness. Now, what's interesting about this particular meeting is that it brings together people from many different fields of science. So it involves a physicist, myself, a chemist, biology, psychology, and indeed mysticism. And I found that very interesting because often you think of science as forming a sort of pyramid in which you have physics at the bottom, and physics explains chemistry. Chemistry explains biology, biology explains psychology, and psychology generates consciousness. And then consciousness maybe generates mysticism, although most people might see that as just an illusion generated by the brain. And it's interesting because this pyramid, if you like, really represents the reductionist physicalistic perspective that ultimately everything depends upon physics and that therefore you don't have to worry about consciousness. It's just a passive production of the brain. But what is interesting is about this meeting is that it sort of turns that argument on its head because it's going to talk about this pyramid, if you like, of physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, and mysticism. But it's going to show that this pyramid is actually a reflection of the link between science and mystical experience. Because science is there at the bottom, physics is there at the bottom, and it all leads all the way up to mystical experiences at the top. And I don't take the view that consciousness and mystical experience is just the culmination of complexity, which is produced by the brain. I think that actually consciousness is really there right at the beginning. It's fundamental to the universe. It underlies even physics. Everything ultimately comes from consciousness and mind. And so that's why I thought the structure of this whole meeting is really rather clever because it's bringing together all these different topics, but in a way which isn't purely reductionist, but which is showing that link, that bridge between, if you like, science and mysticism. And that, of course, is the whole theme of the talk. Now, on the 29th, there are going to be a number of dialogues, and I'm going to be talking with Kate Adamala. We were going to have a dialogue. The theme of my dialogue is going to be physics to creation. So I'll be talking as a physicist, talking about how the Big Bang involves an evolution from 14 billion years ago, generating increasingly complex structures, which culminate ultimately in us and in brains. Kate is going to talk as a chemist. And that, of course, is really links to my talk very nicely because I'm explaining how you have the physical basis because for chemistry, because ultimately to have chemistry you have to have some fine tuning. But to go from that to life, we're going to need the insights of Kate. So I'm really going to look forward to that dialogue. I've never met Kate, although we've had discussions, and I think our two talks together will provide they'll merge very nicely as part of this broader discussion. And then there'll be other discussions between the other people. But I'm only going to talk about my own contribution with Kate here. Well, I think that's enough from me for now. I hope this has whetted your appetite, and I look forward to seeing some of you Saturday, the 29th of November. I think it's at 4 o'clock to 6:30 p.m. UK time. So bye for now. I look forward to seeing you all soon.